Thank you, thank you. Yeah, I want to start this a little differently here because we're here because of Steve House. And Steve House was a special friend to the library project. When I started aboard, he was the first guy on it. And then there was one other guy from, you hear me? One other guy from Kansas City, so we only had three of us. But the three of us managed to get it off the ground, and Steve House was instrumental in that. But Steve was more than just a guy that sits on a board. I don't like boards, basically, because my thinking is wrong, I suppose. But the fact is that he was an active board member, and so was the other guy, and so has everybody that's served since. As board members, they didn't just come and vote once a year at the annual board meeting. They do things, and that's always been a good part of this little project is we had guys like Steve House working with us. And among the things he did was little things of interest to him. One of the things was turning plowshares, what's the old saying, turning plowshares? Swords into plowshares, yes. And he wanted to bring wheelchairs to Vietnam. And we had already delivered a couple of wheelchairs to a couple of people that asked us. What happens is when you start building a library, you start building relationships. So these are much more than libraries. It's more about the relationship, and the library comes along and becomes a meaningful community center if you build the relationships. And with that, we took those, one time we took those wheelchairs to Laos and to Vietnam and to Cambodia on one trip. And he lugged them all around. He arranged buying them in Vietnam, and we bought them in Vietnam, and then we had to get them through customs in Cambodia, and then we had to get them through customs in Laos. But he was a guy that would stick to it, to do whatever he had to do it. So those wheelchairs are still being used now. We were at the Cambodia hospital. Well, that's about 2 years ago, but this is about 20 years ago that he did that. And about 2 years ago, we went back there, and there was one of the wheelchairs was still there. So you never know how long some small act will carry some meaning for the people that give it if you go back and see it. And he was also the beer guy on our project. Pat, Axel, daughter. So this is the part where I said 80-20, 80% true, 20% maybe. So, Steve, wherever you are, he, on one of the very first trips he came over, he said, we got to stop and get some beer. And we did that. And that literally started a tradition that lives to this day. And it lived till 3 weeks ago when we were in Vietnam. We had beer. Beer's an important part of this because beer was part of the relationship with the Vietnamese. And Steve was a leader in instilling that fundamental fact of life and human relationships in everybody in our group. So thank you, family, for being here, and thank you for Steve. And it took a lot of time out of his life getting on a plane and going over there, and he'd be over there for months at a time, but he was doing a lot, and he changed lives. So take solace in that. So at any rate, thanks to Steve, we're all here tonight. Now, in traveling back in time tonight, this is a little bit different because kind of the generation I'm looking at, except for a few of the younger people, is our generation, and that's what the Vietnam War was. The war of the last half of the 20th century, and it tore the country apart, as you well know. But this was an effort at doing the opposite. And it tore Vietnam apart during the war, and we needed to reconcile and get back together after that. And when I went back in 1999, it came on the heels of talking to a couple of guys that I knew, and one of them was John McCain, the senator. At that time, well, back when I met him, was in 1984 in Chicago, because I ran for Congress. He came and did a fundraiser for me, and then we went around the district, and so on. And I still remember when we went back to the airport that day, we were talking about Vietnam. And of course, he was prisoner of war for all those years and stuff. And he said, you know, we got to go back. And I said, well, are you going to go back? He said, yes, I'm going back in 1985, which is going to be the next year. And so I stuck that in my mind, and I thought, you know, I'd like to go back too. One of the reasons I ran for Congress was thinking I would really like to meet the Vietnamese people on a peaceful footing without a war going on. Because I just suspected they were just likable to me to the extent we had any contact, but we didn't have much contact with them. And so in 1999, I decided, well, it's 30 years since I went. I was 18 when I went over, and I decided I'm going to fly back on the same day of the year in 1999 that I flew over in 1969. So on December 8th of, what did I do? I turned it off? There we go, hold on. Okay, by the way, this is Miss Tu, and she is a major in the Vietnamese Army, and also she's a personal friend and has been for years. I met her on the first trip back. She was a docent at the My Lai Massacre Memorial, which is where we went on that day. That's a picture of her that was in Vietnam Magazine last year with her uniform on. At any rate, that's our project. That's the first logo that we did when I went over there the first time. My thinking was to try to do something, I didn't know what. So this is 8 December, went to Vietnam, 69, 8 December, 99, went back. And then 15 December, we had this big meeting that really affected me with the People's Committee because they played Auld Lang Syne. And I didn't expect that in a Communist Party meeting in central Vietnam. Nobody, that's the fire base I was stationed on, and we worked off the fire base in central Vietnam, Quang Nai province. And, this is my unit. The unit is the first unit in the American military ever to be christened in 1784. So we are the unit charged with the responsibility of guarding the tomb of the unknown soldier and the president and all the funerals and stuff at Arlington. And but my part of that unit was assigned to Vietnam, and fortuitously they just pulled the names out of the hat, and I happen to be one of them. We've been associated ever since. But when you see a parade or something, or when President Carter's funeral recently, the old guard is the troops on the ground. So the idea was we always come back, going back to what John McCain had said. So we went back. Now this is the guy, the first guy I met when I got off the plane in 1999. His name is Song. He was a very important guy in our lives, but a very important guy in reconciling differences between America and Vietnam in this small project. And he spoke tremendous English. He was an ARVN officer during the war, and he went into a prison camp after the war. In fact, he tells a story about a book that is really interesting because I brought him over here to travel around the country. We drove from Milwaukee to Seattle, all the way down to San Francisco, Los Angeles, and then back up through Wichita. So on about the 12th day of that trip, it was one of those things where a guy speaks and speaks and speaks. You don't remember a lot of what he said. It was very moving, but on that 12th or 13th day in Wichita at a Rotary Club meeting, it escaped him, but it really wasn't escaping. He wanted to tell this story about his mother. First of all, he knew English in the late 60s when he was drafted by the South. And he had always been enamored with the English language. Why, we don't know. But he said he had one bookshelf in his mom's house with English books on it. And she said she didn't understand a word of English, knew nothing about the language, never had an education. Said, and meanwhile, after the war, he was in the camp, and his mother had gotten a hold of the commandant and asked if she could come see her son. He says, and I was really, really getting down. I'd been in there for 2.5, 3 years, and I didn't know how long they were going to keep us. They have indeterminate sentencing, which in itself is a justice that will never be rectified for those guys. But he says, then one day my mom shows up, and she comes in with a bag full of fruits and vegetables and stuff, and they bring her to him inside the camp. He's allowed to see him for maybe 15, 20 minutes. She leaves. So I picked up those fruits, and I was really happy to have them, and I get back to where I was sleeping. They open it up, and there was one book in there. One book at the bottom of all the vegetables. She was smart enough to bury the book. They didn't check it very closely. They saw this old lady. They thought, well, she's harmless, she'll bring food and stuff for her son. It's gone with the wind. She says, why did she pick Gone with the Wind? Of all the books I had in the books, she had about 20 books, that English book she picked serendipitously, but then I read that book, and I have never forgotten the last words in that book. Tomorrow is another day. And that is what he says, that single book, a book can change your life, and you believe it, I'm telling you, it changed my life. And he was a driven man when he said that. I mean, he wanted to get that message out to everybody out there that a book can save a life, and it saved his. And that's the kind of drive he brought to this project. So when I talk about this, I talk about how lucky I am to meet a guy like that. And in life, they say it's better to be lucky than to be smart. And certainly that's the case with me. My family says it. So he's a special guy. And this kind of embodies our vision of the famous Vietnamese saying, we cannot change the past, we can change the future. The choppers are the past, but the kids riding into the sunlight is the future. And we wanted to work together changing that future, and so did the Vietnamese. So here, this is Quang Ngai province. That's okay. You can leave this here. That was Quang Ngai province, and a map where some of our libraries are located. This, again, is the lady I was talking about. The officer on that first slide. This, too. And at first, when I got over there, she didn't like me at all. It was American, and she didn't like Americans, but they had her working as a docent at the My Lai massacre site. There weren't many Americans coming by then yet. It was 1999. But I left $100 in an American Express traveler's check. She took it gracefully, but then we parted company. Now, she figures she's never going to see me again. I'm just one guy who came for one trip, and that'll be the end of it. Well, then when I came back, the song says, the lady you gave the $100 to, she had a problem. She didn't take your passport picture, They couldn't cash that check. She owed $100. Her pay was $25 a month. She didn't get paid for 4 months because they took that money out of her check. And so I said, well, we're going to meet her for sure, and I gave them $100. Well, after that, we kept in touch, and that's her baby. First of all, she got engaged, and then she asked me on one trip over later in 2002, would you be his godfather? So I'm godfather to her baby. The baby was born April 6, 2002. And now he's an architect, trained in Japan. Smart kid. But at any rate, she also kept us in touch with My Lai officials. So years later, we came back and we built a library there. She's definitely part of that story. And she also became a docent at the War Museum in Hanoi. Now, this is the plaque I took the first time. Oh, much better. Yeah. Okay. Well, this is the plaque that I took over there the first time. I wanted to have something to give them. So we composed that out of the pain and anguish of the past. May we forge the keys to new horizons of peace and prosperity between the Vietnamese and American peoples. And then the logo. And then I had that translated by a Marquette University Vietnamese student. And we took it over there. They put it up in a prominent place in an old shed. And I never saw it again, even though I've been back there maybe 30, 40 times in the years since. But the important thing that plaque still served was it was a bridge of some kind. And now that those words are in a lot of the libraries. This is there because that day I went there that first time. There was a big flood, and about 600,000 people were out of their homes. And there was a question whether or not I'd be able to meet the People's Committee because of this flooding. But because I was an ex-soldier and traveling alone, the People's Committee that makes a decision on that kind of thing said, well, let him go. So we went down and we meet the People's Committee, and they thought I wasn't going to be able to come. So they didn't order 2 baby water buffalo I had requested be purchased in Da Nang and shipped down for the 2 poorest families in that commune. They said, well, it takes 5 hours. We could call up and we could get it down here. I'd already paid for the water buffalo, so I said, well, let's order it. I'll stay here. We'll wait for it. So it was about noon. It was going to take till 5 o'clock to get these water buffalo down from Da Nang. No problem. So that meant we're going to have lunch together. And that's when everything changed, because they pulled out a case of beer. Now we're back to beer. But they started passing drinks around, and each one would drink to me one-on-one, and then the next guy, there were 5 guys. And Song finally says to me, he says, Chuck, you don't have to do this. You're a guest. They know you're a guest. I said, no, I was born and raised on a farm in Wisconsin. They're playing in my ballpark now. But in the course of the drinking, 2.5, 3 hours in, the water buffalo are coming down from Da Nang, and we started talking. Everybody's getting a little bit loose, myself included. And they talked about what we could do, and I offered to build a bridge. And they said, no, by the time you build a bridge, that'll take you 6 months or a year. That won't help us immediately. And that's when Song came up with this idea. He says, we need libraries in my country. I said, okay, I'll build 1 library. And they liked that. So we came back to the States, and from there we started working on building a library. Then when we went back the second time, that's when I heard this song. Auld Lang Syne, in a communist mud hole, literally, in Vietnam, in 1999. And they played it in Vietnamese and they sang it. And a cup of kindness is one of the lines in that song. And I never forget that. And I asked you, what's that? Oh, yeah. Go ahead. She can play. Oh, you want to click? No, it's not. You want this? At any rate, Auld Lang Syne really shocked me. And whoever dreamed that up, they had a karaoke player in that room. It was just a dirty old karaoke player. There was no other music in the place. Dim light. This is it. But to hear that song 30 years after the war coming from the enemy, that was something different. Now you're getting it. Okay. Yeah. So, but at any rate, that kind of thing happened a lot. They were kind of ingratiating themselves to the Western culture in a way I wouldn't expect, and you wouldn't expect it either. I mean, it speaks well for their culture. But as I learned more about the culture, that was not new. Historically, Song took me to a village where you go up on a roof, and he says you can see America, see how Vietnam's culture is from this roof. He pointed to a French-style roof, a Vietnamese-style roof, a Japanese-style roof, and then a regular Vietnamese roof. And they all had little distinctive architectural features about them. So the Vietnamese, it was nothing new for them to incorporate things they liked in another culture and discarding the stuff they didn't like. That's why they make great bread now, croissants, all of that. The French left that behind. The French architecture, the Opera House in Hanoi is exquisite. Also, French architecture's impact in the major buildings of the country, they shamelessly took them over, and we're proud of them, and they should be, which also bore on us when we later started building libraries, architecture. Yeah, all I had to do was click one quickly. These are Vietnamese guys playing this in a bar in Hanoi. Just quick. Okay. Now this is the first ambassador to the U.S. He was appointed by President Clinton in 1990, or not appointed, he was appointed by, appointed or approved by President Clinton in 1997. His relevance is this: in 1999, I came over here. Then I came back to the States in January. And I thought, I'm going to write the ambassador a letter. Nobody knows who the hell I am, a farm boy from Wisconsin. But I called the embassy, and one guy answered. He said, well, I'll talk to the ambassador about it. Now, this is a country that is just coming out of the diplomatic silence that had occurred between Vietnam and America between 75 and then 95 when Clinton did reestablish relations. And sure enough, the second call I did to that guy, he said, I'll ask the ambassador. And the ambassador said, sure, I'll write a letter. So this is the letter he wrote, and he recounts what happened to us in Duck Bowl in 1999, just a few months before. It's dated May 18th, 2000. And he sent that letter to me. I kept that letter, and I had hoped that it would help raise money. It didn't really help raise any money then, but it did help give me some legitimacy when I talked to some people. But I was running into a problem. Most guys I talked to back then, this is 2000 now, several said, if I go back, I'm going back with a machine gun, or, there was just a lot of open wounds yet. It was a little too soon, apparently. But now we're getting older. And now people they're more open to the idea of going back and seeing how the people are doing and so on. So that really meant a lot when he did that, because it legitimized who we were. Another guy we owe a panoply of thank yous. This is the construction of the first library. And you see the picture on the bottom. In the communist rhetoric, when they're teaching about what capitalism like, they rather mock the capitalist approach to the working class. I made a point of having a workers' party, not a lot unlike we would have after baling hay, or my brother would have after building a building. These work construction. And these guys did a great job on that building. And because I couldn't get anybody else's money in the deal, because it was dealing with a communist country, it hadn't been done before, we didn't have a design, we didn't have a contract, we spent a week doing the contracts. There was a lot of, reticence to get involved, which you can't blame people for looking back on. But because I was lucky to run into these two guys, that, by the way, is my daughter, not my blood daughter. She was in an orphanage in Da Nang, and she's the one we brought down from that orphanage to hand over that first handover and cut the ribbons on that first library. That was October 13, 2001. But these two guys, including, my daughter again, there she's graduating from pharmacy school in Haiphong, Vietnam. And this is her now. And she has a pharmacy about 10 blocks away from the orphanage she was raised on. And then this woman is my wife. She was 9 years old in 1985, and she already was studying English. And she wanted to come to America. She had that in her head. And her father had saved gold and stuff to pay the captain on this boat to get them out to the sea, to the bigger boat, and take them off into the to a larger ship and either get to Hong Kong, Singapore, Indonesia. And they wouldn't let her go because they said, if you're going to get yourself killed, more important, you're going to get us killed. You're too small and all of that. So she didn't go, but something in her head clicked. She kept working. She worked in the first restaurant in Quy Nhon, Vietnam that ever had strictly English language for tourists and so on. And throughout all of that, she learned English. And then later on, many years later, 2011, we had problems with the People's Committee, and she was appointed my translator, and she was really good at it. She solved a lot of problems, and now she's my problem, a happy problem. That's her now. So, but, and that's the wedding picture, but this is Song again. 10 years he worked for us. No pay. This is Nguyen Thi Le. Her dad was a captain in the North Vietnamese Army. She comes from a province north of Hanoi. She ran the project for me in country for 6 years and did an extraordinary job. And then now Coy has done it since 2014, so this is her 11th year doing this. But notice 2 of the 3 are women. And then this is the My Lai Library we built at My Lai. This was very important. When we met with the People's Committee, or not the People's Committee, the headmaster of that school, he asked, the first thing out of his mouth was, "What took you so long?" I said, "Well, you got to explain to me, what do you mean by that?" He said, "Well, we thought the Americans would be here rather quickly, and they thought they could depend on America for help to build the schools and stuff like that, but the Americans hadn't come back for that. They'd come back to go to the museum and stuff and to pay respects. There had been some traffic that way, but in terms of somebody bringing some money or an idea, they didn't come until we came with that." And it turned out that guy really wound up being a friend of ours through the years. And so now we're signing the contracts with the chairman of the My Lai People's Committee. And now we're doing the groundbreaking for the My Lai People's Committee. And this is 2023 in My Lai with the kids. We've been going back every year since then, giving scholarships and so on. And that is the woman that is headmaster and also English teacher at My Lai High School. And those are people that contributed money to that high school. Now here, this is the soldier's medal that was given to Hugh Thompson. Hugh Thompson was the pilot in the helicopter that came in and broke up the massacre. He also had a gunner by the name of Larry Colburn, and Larry Colburn was on our committee for this library. And there's Hugh Thompson there. He came from a career military family. And there it's Larry Colburn, the guy we met down in Georgia. They're both from Georgia. And that little lady there, she survived the massacre that day because he ordered Colburn to fire on the American troops. So naturally, they're near and dear to the hearts of the Vietnamese. But one thing the Vietnamese always ask when we go back there, and we go back there all the time, where's Lieutenant Calley? And Colonel Medina. Now, it turned out Medina died in Marinette, Wisconsin. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but I think he was either president of the Rotary or a Lions Club or something in Marinette. That was his life story. And Calley, for his part, lived in Georgia. And Calley always refused to even talk about Vietnam until they thought he had to come back. They didn't want to kill him, although I can imagine in the way his mind worked, he might have thought that. They thought, in the Buddhist way of thinking, that he could never make peace with his past if he didn't come back to where it happened and speak to Buddha. And they would ask, he should come back, we'll forgive him. Never did, and he died April 28th, 2024. So we got the My Lai Library built. Now this is a library built by the Vietnam Veterans Against the War. They funded this also in Duck Pho, also not far from My Lai. And this is Miss Sung. She is the daughter of the contractor that I built the first library for, and we built this one just 2 years ago. So she was about 5 years old when I was first there in the year 2000, in 1999. Now this is kind of what we do. That's Dr. Tim Eckstein. He's a CB. He, in that particular case, gave money to each of those kids. Now we give them these scholarships, and we're only half kidding when we say the $50 we give them is a lot of money. That money in Vietnam will pay for food for a couple of months for them. So money that here, it doesn't take a lot of money to really change a life over there like it does here. And so we go around to all these libraries and give them scholarships. This is Ms. Zung, that's library enhancements. Painting on the libraries. There were several things we wanted to do architecturally and decor-wise. One was we wanted a separate building, separate from the school. The communists, when they build a school, they build it U-shaped. So there's a string of buildings here, a string of buildings there, and a string of buildings there. They're usually 1 or 2 stories, and they're all connected. So the kids can get classroom to classroom. They're very functional and they're ugly. And what we wanted, and now you can't see the gable on this, this is the Duc Tan School, and that shows the pillars, the reading areas outside, the lights. Also lights in the library are important because it's the idea of being open and free. So architecturally speaking, we changed that, and we always said it had to be a separate building, and it always has been. So you can see the corner of the building there is the end of the other building. But we wanted to force the kids to come out of one building and have to go back into another one to get to the books. And then we talked to the teachers about assignments you can give the kids that force them to go to the library. So forcing them to go to the library has always been an important thing for us. So that's a little bit of a way we got our nose into the idea of how you teach. And this is a 2022 groundbreaking for that library. Now this is Kim Phuc. And I don't know if you're familiar with Kim Phuc. She is the little girl running down the street at the napalm when they bombed her. And that's the cameraman that took that picture in '72. Well, they came over and they helped us raise money for that library there. And she's been a close friend for years. But there's a computer she bought for the kids. And she lives in Toronto, Ontario. And she's got a little foundation of her own, in fact. But she and Nick Ut, the Pulitzer Prize winning photographer, have been leaders in helping us raise money up there. This is more Duc Tan. Duc Tan is her library. This is a smaller library. These are 25,000 and the big ones are 67,000. That's the principal dancing with the kids. Just the standard stuff you'd see at a school. This is a library that we're just kicking off now. And this is a $100,000 library. And on this one, the People's Committee now has kicked in $23,000 of that $100,000. The Vietnam Vets Against the War is funding that one. And that's also going in Quang Ngai. But that's Vietnam, and you can see those are the list of the provinces where we have libraries. So that's basically the library story. But now we get to Laos. And Laos was led by a GI, a Green Beret by the name of Ross Worley. He comes from Kansas City. And he had hired a bunch of Lao workers, refugees, back in the 80s. And he started really making money on a concrete forming idea he had. And he always felt that the Lao work ethic is what helped him be successful. So he wanted to do something, so we went to Laos, we showed him what we did in Vietnam, and that's the library that they funded. So now later, up there on the left, that library is funded by Hmong from the Midwest. The guy that is the head of the Hmong War Monument at DeLonge Park in Sheboygan led that fundraising for that. But in Laos, we were fortunate to have, again, a good leader to work with, Madam Kangdoan Netavong. She was the last member of the royal family of the Middle Kingdom of Laos, and she had some push inside the government. Later, we had problems in Laos, and we're still working on those. So that's not an entirely happy story. Now this is Cambodia. And Cambodia, we met a guy named Bernie Krischer. Bernie Krischer was the Asia bureau chief for Newsweek magazine, but he also was born in 1931 in Germany, came to America with his parents in 1937, escaped Nazism. And when he learned about what was going on in Cambodia, he was very moved by that, given his family history. He married a woman in Japan, and he successfully started a foundation, Aid to Cambodia. And we talked to him about building a library. This guy down in the corner worked for Bernie, and he had built that but didn't have it done, and then we funded that. And in the course of that, we run into another of these cultural experiences that is more than just an aside. It goes to the heart of how do you teach the kids. They had, we had a lunch, one of the first lunches we had there with the government officials, and I'm sitting next to the village chief's wife, and I got the translator to my left. And so just to make small talk, I asked, well, when did you get married? Oh, I got married in 1977. I said, well, do you have a picture of it I could see? And a tear welled up in her eye. And then the story came out. 1977 was the middle of Pol Pot years, which ran from 1975 to 1979. And when she was married that day, they had teenage kids come in with an officer, the Pol Pot officials, and they brought all these marriage age people together in a room, men and women, and stripped them all down. And then those teenage guys selected the bodies that would go together. And the first question they asked, was covered, and we had Reuters, and a lot of news agencies were interested in this story, and they did publish stories about it. They would ask questions of the people, and if they got the answer, these kids, some were 12, some were 14, they'd ask, how long does it take to make a baby? Well, Pol Pot's instruction to his officers was, we want many babies, many babies. Well, one woman says, well, 9 months. And this other woman says, well, 3 months. You're right. So they gave her a gift, and the other woman didn't get coconuts that day. And that was the kind of thing that was going on in that village in that year. So that being the case, we decided to have a wedding for them. They picked out 10 couples that were in that meeting that day, and we had a full-fledged Khmer wedding in that village in 2006. And they came and now these are people in their 50s. And they came and they were just stunning. The women were dressed up. They had beautiful hairdos. And the guys came and it was really amazing what they did. And that's the 10 couples up there. And those 10 couples, one guy has died so far, but the rest of them are still with us. But more importantly, the idea was with us. And we had the party at that library. And so it became a place of joy, a place to look into the future a little bit. So that particular experience got in the news, and sure enough, I get a letter from Sun Hun Sen. He's the Samdech, or the leader of the Cambodian government, who took over for Pol Pot when they got rid of Pol Pot. And he sends a letter. He saw that the people liked this story, so he comes out with a national announcement with a picture of him and his wife, and talks about how he was forced to marry her, and it turned out happy and all of that. And it was another example of they replaced one dictator with another, because when we went over there and talked to the people, they didn't believe him for 1 minute. He didn't go through what they went through, but he immediately attached his cart to that because he saw political currency in it. So Cambodia has a special soft spot for us just because of what they went through with the Pol Pot experience. So this is, finally, this is the orphanage that my daughter was raised in. And that was taken in 2001. And when we went to the orphanage, I played Santa Claus many years over there in all 3 countries. And that's me there, but in 2001, I told somebody the story of It's a Wonderful Life. And that when you die, you know, if you don't live your life out to the fullest, you don't know how you're affecting other lives. So we got into this little philosophical discussion with the teachers. And when we got in there, they had made that banner in English and put it up. And they gave me a gift. Now, this is a communist country, an atheist country. And at that time, they were still trying to do away with some of the Buddhist teachings. But they gave me this beautiful plate, and it's a picture of the Blessed Virgin Mary and baby Jesus. And it says, It's a Wonderful Life, and the date is December 2001 on that. And that showed me, once again, that they were interested in incorporating other cultural activities in their own culture. And that is a key component to opening the door to these libraries. So on that happy ending, Santa Claus says bye. And now we'll open for some questions.
How have you managed to supply these libraries with books?
We tried once to collect books here in the States, which really wasn't a problem. There's plenty of people who have books and would donate them. And we had a friend at FedEx. The founder of FedEx is a guy named Wilson, and somebody knew him, and he was generous. He said, well, we'll fly him over there. So we had about 10 pallets of these books, 68,000 books we had. And we got them to the airport in Milwaukee, shipped them to Memphis, which is FedEx's hub, and they chartered a jet and took them over there. But then by the time we got them through customs, which it took several months, and we had friends in Hanoi that helped us with that, and then we had English books, and when we analyzed the books, you know, you had chemistry books, you had, you know, nothing that really fit what we wanted to do. It was generous on the part of the donors. It just didn't work for what we needed to do. Plus, at that time, the government was starting to ramp up book sales in the big cities. You could buy some English books. In fact, I found The Life of Vince Lombardi there in a library in Saigon. So it made more sense. The books are really cheap to buy English books and Vietnamese books in Vietnam. What was really interesting, one time we went to Nam Dong. Nam Dong is where this guy received his Medal of Honor in the battle. His Colonel Roger Donlin. He was a personal friend of ours for many years, and his friend asked me to go to Nam Dong and see if we could build a library. We got there. This is an area where what you would know as the mountain yards, but the mountain ethnics lived. And we built one. And we keep going back there. We were just back there a month ago, 2 months ago. But at any rate, when we got there, one trip, I had been trying to get English books into there. And we go back there and I pull a book off the shelf. It's Tom Sawyer in English by a Vietnamese publisher, selected by a mountain ethnic at Nam Dong battlefield. I thought, wow, we made a trip. We've come a long way. And the power of a book there, as Song would say, you don't know where it's going to take you. What happened was one of the ethnic, and by the way, when we started this, they didn't have librarians. There wasn't a university in Vietnam that could provide a librarian education in a professional way. And naturally, librarians are near and dear to our heart because that's what we do, And but a university pops up. Now they have a master's in library science, a couple of universities, now more universities. Now that mountain ethnic that found those books, she had graduated from a Da Nang university that had just began providing a library science degree. So it took some time for them just to come around to all the infrastructure you need to have a library and have it be good, and they're doing it. But I was tickled pink to see Tom Sawyer, and then I found another one was the autobiography of Ben Franklin. So those two were heartwarming little finds.
In Vietnam today, how would you describe the situation that the citizens are in relative to electronic surveillance in comparison to China, and how free people are to live their life?
That's quite a question. And it's a good question. My wife is Catholic, and there's 100 million people in Vietnam, about 20 million of them are Catholic. And my wife has priests and nuns in her family, and also there was one archbishop that is kind of a shirt-tail relationship with her. But across from her, and then we stay at her house when I'm there in Vietnam, if we're not traveling around the libraries, there's an alleyway. Across the way is a communist family, and a communist family right next door to them. And they constantly report things they hear said, and when I'm over there, they report that I'm there. Now, when I get over there, there's a process that her brother has to go through to announce that Chuck Deutsch is back in the country. And that's all okay, but they want to know where I'm at. And also, her mother, now that this just is a development in the last couple of years, they required the adults to get a chip put in the ID card they carry, so that the police can follow them. And that's a very little known thing about Vietnam, and it's not a good thing, obviously, On the other hand, in other ways, they're very open, and but yeah, that's about all I can say about it. But you made your point inadvertently. I mean, yeah.
I lived in Vietnam for 15 months. I didn't learn how to say much, but when you mentioned beer and the importance of beer, here's what I can say in Vietnamese. Lamon ko chola toa mot ba mui ba an nukta. That's
Ba moi ba.
I'm asking for a beer on
Well, man, you came away with the most important thing you need to learn in any culture. You know, what the heck? We know that in Wisconsin. You know?
So Chuck, you let your last name slip in the last comment, but say it again so everybody can hear how you pronounce Theusch.
Oh, Toish.
Thank you.
So,
Questions or comments?
Here is like,
Does the government in Vietnam or the other countries, does it get involved in the types of books that you have available? Is
Oh,
there
yes,
censoring of any sort?
and it varies quite a bit between provinces. And think of a province as like a state. If Illinois said well, it's okay, Wisconsin says it's not okay. Well, that same kind of thing goes on there too. And so they do get involved in the big cities. It's more free and easy. In the small villages, in the hinterlands, which is where we go because we're interested in going to the poor places where we can help them. There it's more conservative. In fact, we just had a problem 2 weeks ago. We built a library not far from where my wife was born, and it turned out we had gotten a plaque approved. And the library was by VVAW, and they did a nice, we did a nice job on it. It's a beautiful library. The kids were there. We had the dedication. But somebody was upset that they didn't put exactly the words in the plaque that we had approved. So I could understand VVAW being upset. But what happened was the People's Committee, when they were ready to give final approval, did not approve the wording on that plaque. There were 2 words they wanted off of it. The names of the VVAW and then Barry Romo, a leader who had just passed away, they were okay. But this other word they wanted off of there. And it created a fury that resulted in us going back to that library, my wife and I, and talking to them about changing the plaque. Well, they agreed to change the plaque. And we had to go back a second time to make sure they did, and they did. And then we took them out to lunch. And then we had our beer. And then we got the answer. We started talking. And this is really true. All this beer falls into it. He knows it back there. And one guy that came to us to that second lunch was the contractor, Mr. Zoom. And he said, well, we just had some Americans in here because they found the bodies of these guys that were buried. And it turned out it was in that district. Now think of a district like a county. So let's say in Wapaka County, nearby, the People's Committee had just ruled on, or just found these 32 bodies. And it turned out it was 60 bodies later. But that was in 2022. And the MIA group that had weighed in on this they were working on trying to find these guys. What it was there was a battle on December 26, 1966, and in that battle, the Americans prevailed after firing something called a beehive round, which is a hell round, to say the least. And that killed a lot of these people. And that community had been living with that all these years. And then finally, through the internet, there was a guy in Vietnam and a guy in America looking for these MIAs. They connected up. So 4 guys came over there in 2022. One of them was a VVAW member, in fact, from New York, to try to find those bodies. And they did find where some of them were buried, because these guys remembered that after that battle that day, the next day, they have a picture of a flying crane. Have you ever seen these? They're helicopter pilots, helicopters, but they're flying cranes. They can lift howitzers and heavy equipment. Well, they brought out a cat, and they built mass graves, and they put 32 of these bodies in this mass grave. So the People's Committee was just dealing with that. in the last couple of years. VTV Channel 4 in Vietnam ran a story about that with these 4 Americans on that. And they had a copy of this. So when I met this guy, this was February 5th. February 5th we met him. February 5th he asked me, you want to see these? Yeah, well, I want to go there, sure. So the next day we went up to My Lai, then we came back and we went to the site. And there's a monument there, and around the monument they have the excavating devices they use to dig these bodies out, and they have the body where they excavated to take the bodies out still open, and the bodies were reinterred in the village where we always have our meetings. So, excuse me, the Vietnamese still have to deal with the realities of that war in a much more real and present sense than we do. So they have that, it's a raw wound, and the People's Committee didn't want to improve this word on that plaque. Now, since then, in the last couple of weeks, when I told that story to our friends here, well, they kind of understood it, but in the beginning, they sent a rather riled email about, well, what's the matter with the People's Committee? Don't they understand it? They say there was no fucking war? In an email to me in Vietnam. And that kind of outpouring of anger seemed to me to epitomize what the whole war was all about, just the thing we're trying to deal with. But it's, on one hand, you can understand it. It tore the country apart. But on the other hand, the time has passed. It's time to calm down. It's time to work together and build a future. That's what the Vietnamese want to do. They don't want to talk about the war a lot, but they took me to that place. And now when we go back to that library, and we will go back to all of them, we'll go back and we'll also stop at that, where that excavation took place. So we've got that video, and we brought it back here to the States. I don't know if we'll get anybody to play it, but it was an interview done by a woman from Saigon who was a very, really intelligent interviewer and spoke great English. I mean, it's a well-done interview and a well-done story, but it also tells what the difficulty we were having with the library we were building just on this, what seems like a small thing, but it's a big thing. The plaque is important. And once we got that all out on the table, now next week we're having a dedication on March 12th of another library that's built in that same district. And this one was paid for by a guy named Jack Piccolo from Joliet, Illinois. He used to work at Argonne Labs, but he was in that unit. And that library, they painted his name on the wall in trying to compensate for what now they feel they were sorry they did. But now everybody's coming together, and so it's a real happy ending with a thing that had quite a twist for us between December and January of this year. That's 50 years after the war, and the 50-year celebration of the independence of the Vietnamese is going to be April 30th, 2025. So it's, you know, they all have happy endings in the end, I guess, I mean, for us. So especially that story.
So going back to the construction, I'm imagining that you're not out there like Jimmy Carter swinging a hammer. What,
No.
you hire local contractors, people
Always.
that have the expertise. Architecture is from Vietnam or from the country you're in, or
Yeah.
how does that all work?
Yeah, it's all local contractors, and that was a condition that I placed on the first one because I wanted to build relationships with people right in that community, right out of the box. If we bring somebody in that they don't know, then they're gone a week after they finish up drive the last nail. It's just not the same thing as you can imagine. I mean, it's just kind of a basic common sense thing. And they have local contractors. Now, they do have a bidding process, which is a whole nother story. that we have to be sensitive to, but it is, it harkens much more to a capitalist free enterprise bidding system than you might think it would. They just let out bids on this bigger library that we're just starting, and they'll take 3 bids and they'll choose the best one. Now on that one, we have the People's Committee's got $25,000 in the deal. So they've got more skin in the game, as the old saying goes, than we've had in the past. In the initial library, they didn't have any money. So when we were sending money over there, if you run into the wrong guy, you'd get a poor project and you wouldn't get your money back, and that would have been the end of it. But those first 2 guys I ran into, luckily, an honest guy and hardworking guys, and they built a beautiful library. And then I could bring people over here and look at it, and I could see that it was a successful project. But yeah, they have a bid system, and it seems to work pretty good to the extent any bid system works. Yep.
Chuck, if someone's interested in helping purchase books and or contributing to the building of libraries, your book here has your contact information. How could people do that?
Yeah, you just get a hold of us. We're a small operation, so it's my wife and me and a couple of helicopter pilots, and one guy in North Mountain Division. He's in Vietnam now, getting ready for the dedication next week. But we're not a big operation, but we seem to get a lot done, you know. So.
Chuck.
Oh.
The thing that I've got a question about is, how often have your sites actually been nailed with unexploded ordnance? Well,
We built a baseball diamond in Dong Ha at Lê Loi High School, and every single project starts out with the number one thing is got to be war legacy clearance. That's unexploded bombs and Agent Orange. And they have to have a clearance of that. Now, when we're building at a school, typically that whole site that's been done because they built the school there since the war. But when you build it for a community library, then we may be in an area where it requires more work to properly excavate that. So there used to be more times than not. Now, recently we've only been building their schools, and it hasn't been the issue. In the beginning, it was an issue. Operation Renew is this major landmine, unexploded bomb, and Agent Orange hazard removal and war legacy project in Quang Tri, and they're in Quang Nai, and those guys come in and they do clear it, but it's not such a big deal where we are. There are places that are still badly contaminated.
Yeah, Chuck, I never been to Vietnam, but well, I guess I'll ask one Vietnam question. When 1967, that day when they were pulling the names out of the hat, the sergeant that pulled you down, could he pronounce your name, or did or did he have the same problem that Dan
No,
did?
but the first guy that, when I got drafted and got up, we wound up in Fort Campbell, he's Chuck Tatum, Tatum.
Yeah.
And nobody answered. And I'm thinking, I'm 18 years old. I'm thinking, well, like, I couldn't screw it up that bad. There's no 2T, Tatum.
Yeah.
It was too far. But it wasn't too far for this brainless DI I had. And finally he started spelling the name T-H-E. Oh, if the next letter is Judas. I had a low call through gravel all day.
So they found you.
Yeah, they found me. Yeah.
I've done quite a bit of post-retirement work in Indonesia.
Oh.
It is in Vietnam, but one of the things, and I've been asked to help with libraries out there. I've been asked by the underfunded, hassled school teacher out there in these poor villages, trying to teach these kids, particularly English, because English is their ticket out of poverty, out of the rural society. Now, there's a big divide between the rural villages and societies in Indonesia and, let's say, the moneyed capitalists in Jakarta and the major cities on Java and things. And it's kind of like the Javanese don't really care about these villages on the outer islands. You have a lot of capitalism coming into Vietnam right now. Your project seems small, driven by veterans with the right kind of hearts and things. Is there any way to get support from the corporations that are having their clothes made over there and those kinds of things over here? Would they have any interest in helping these rural villages and villagers and things, or wouldn't it even enter their thought process?
Well, I don't know, because I've never considered appealing to a major corporation because I didn't want to destroy our mission. And our mission is reconciliation between citizens. And that would, and they'd be more than happy to have the money, and they do get good support in Vietnam from the corporate side, but for what we do, we don't aim at that, and we've never had any either, for that matter. It's all been, they used to, well, they still call it pocket money, and I found out early on it's important to use the term pocket money in Vietnam because they are taught that Americans are rich and they're coming over with millions. And we got to take that, we got to disabuse them of that. Not every American is rich. Somebody took their pocket money. Pocket money, when they do the translation, means money out of your pocket that you could have used for something else, like going to a ball game. And so we have to, it's a subtle thing, but it's true, that you have to let them know in a subtle way that this is people who've taken their own money. That's somebody sitting down writing a check. There's, what's her name, Miss Pfeiffer. The check you gave me tonight, you know, some money. No, we're going to get some scholarships for that. But when I explain that to them, they're going to see Winchester Academy, but it's going to be a little more of an explanation. It's going to be an explanation. We got together one night in this place, this small town in Wisconsin, someplace they never heard of. It's not going to be in Chicago, New York, LA. It's not a rich corporation at a big Hilton hotel. It's in the basement of a library where some people got together and they came up with some money and they wanted us to give it to you. And I need a picture so I can take it back to them and ask them for more money.
I think it's a wrap. Go ahead. I think that's a wrap. Thank you very much, Chuck.
Chuck Tuish.